Hi, it's Anthony here. Some parts of today's conversation may be triggering for some people. If you need help, no matter where you are in the world, search LGBTI Helpline. And remember, it does get better.
There was always a sense that I was different.
And she kind of just reassured me with real life examples that that's not how it was.
It's taken a while to unpack it all because it's a weird thing that has to come out.
I wasn't 100% sure I was lesbian.
And one of my kids fell out in the bikini set. Families are a great thing, but I have one now with my husband.
Being gay because it was on TV when I was growing up.
Shouting 2, 4, 6, 8, gay is just as good as straight.
Precious queer youth are taken care of.
I've been mistaken for a man ever since the age of 20.
And yet back then also you had that freedom to express yourself in these places.
Wait, so like all of these people are LGBTQ?
You're listening to LGBTI Conversations with Anthony Doig. Our guest on LGBTI Conversations today grew up in a Christian religion family and was told from a very young age that homosexuality was a sin. When he came to realise he had same-sex attraction, his church leaders told him not to give in to temptation. This is Aaron Kelly's story. Okay, I suppose we've got to go back to the very start. Can you tell us about growing up and how it was for you?
Yeah, growing up, I grew up in a very conservative evangelical Christian family. So growing up, I knew that I was gay from a very, very young age, but was taught and believed that it was wrong and that it was just believed that there was this part of me that was disgusting. And so as I grew older, would continually pray and seek advice from church leaders and stuff like that to try and get rid of this aspect of my life.
And you were saying that you knew at a relevantly young age. And what era were we talking here?
So I was born in 1988, so I grew up through the 90s and the early noughties as a child and a teenager. And it was probably around the age of around 12, 13 that I knew that I was a bit different from most of the people in our family circle.
And you obviously were going to church. You were part of the church community. So you would have probably heard a lot during church days about how homosexuality was a sin.
At that age, the young age when I started to realise I was different, I didn't really understand what was different about me because it wasn't something that was talked about a lot. It was only when my mum found out that I was attracted to someone of the same sex that she began to fight that and push back and pretty much make it clear to me that if that was the choice I was going to make with my life, that I needed to find alternative living arrangements basically at the age of 14.
Wow. And obviously your parents probably would have went to the church to try to find help.
Yeah, so we had a youth pastor who sort of took me under his wing a little bit, pastorally caring for me, I guess. And had prayed for me or would meet with me every couple of weeks and take me out for a milkshake and to sort of disciple me or help me to overcome some of the problems that they saw in my life, and homosexuality being one of those.
So talk us through that. If you're not from a religious family, how would they go about trying to put you on so-called the right track?
It's a lot of using the Bible, which is, as Christians, I believe that is God's word, that is the truth, and so it trumps any desires you have, it trumps anything that the external world may say is the right thing to do or the right way for society to go. God's word trumps all of that. And so a lot of these Bible verses have become a sacred weapon against the homosexual community to teach you that it was wrong, to teach you that it was a sin, but then they'd also be praying for you and making you feel as though this thing inside of you, your identity at the core of who you are, is so disgusting that God would want to heal you from it and God would want to change you. If you were a good Christian and someone who wanted to inherit eternal life and go to heaven, that you would do everything in your power to submit yourself to God's plan and to change that about yourself.
So during that time, did anyone come to you and speak to you about, we understand that it's not a choice, but you can work with us and overcome it? Or was it more always seen as, oh, you're choosing this path in life? Everyone
who I'd ever spoken to would say that it was a choice. But and they would never have said that it was something I was born with or it was my identity. They would say that it's an active choice to give in to temptation. Christians don't believe that you are born gay, or most evangelical conservative Christians don't. I can't speak for all of them because there are a small number who do believe that. But in the evangelical conservative Christian church, the majority would believe that God doesn't make mistakes and he doesn't make you imperfect, that that's a temptation that you're giving into. And everyone has to deal with temptations in their lives. And my temptation was homosexuality and same-sex attraction.
So was there anyone else around the community of the church that you would have known that was homosexual, or that was kind of within your age group that was kind of going through the same thing at the time, or was it just not spoken about?
No, it just wasn't spoken about. And being so inside that Christian bubble and that Christian community, I mean, all of my family's friends were Christian, went to a Christian private school, and we were very involved in our church. So there was no external worldview for me at that young age to really comprehend what an alternative worldview would look like. And when my mum had suggested at the age of 14 that if I was going to choose that I'd have to find somewhere else to live, I immediately thought, well, everyone that we know, all of our friends, all of my family, my teachers at school, everyone I know would believe the same thing as my mum. And so there's nowhere I could go. I'll be homeless.
And do you think your mother would have followed through with that if you didn't look like you were trying to pray the gay away, as we could say?
Yeah, I really do think she would have. I think my mum's faith in their version of Christianity is so important to her that she would have seen still having me in the home and still raising me almost as condoning that choice. And so the only option was to show that there would be a punishment if I chose that.
So knowing that there is no other option and that your whole life is related to the church in some way, how do you go about living this lie within the church and hoping for the best?
I don't know if it was living a lie necessarily, but I genuinely believed that the narrative that the church spoke about, the narrative of homosexuality being a sin, I believed that that was a temptation that I faced, and that if I was to be a good Christian, I just wouldn't give in to that temptation. I would not bow down to it at all. And so the best way forward for me, even if God wouldn't heal me or take away the temptation, was for me to stand firm in my faith and be a good example that, hey, this is something I face, but I am still able to live my life as holy and as something that pleases God through the face of this temptation.
Because I know in some religions, and there's so many out there today, it's pretty mind-boggling, that it's okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it, and we'll just turn a blind eye and everyone will live happily ever after. Were you able not to act on it during that time?
Yeah, that's right. There was one or two moments as a late teen where the furthest I'd ever gone with another guy was a kiss. I'd kissed a friend of mine who I was attracted to and felt very guilty. And the pain and the trauma, I guess, that brought into my life just didn't feel worth it. So I would go and I'd submit myself to prayer ministry sessions, which is a form of conversion practice, where they would lead you through these deliverance prayers to ask God to remove that demonic possession of homosexuality from your life. In one of those sessions that I was told that God would do a miracle, but first I, as a Christian, had to take a step of faith. There's no point praying, God heal me over and over again, because Jesus in the Bible only ever responded to people taking a step of faith or an action first. And so they recommended that my step of faith, since all the prayers hadn't worked up to this point and nothing we'd tried had taken away this sort of attraction in me, the recommendation was to find a woman who I wasn't attracted to but ticked all the other boxes, and that because God created marriage and it was this holy covenant, it was one of the first things he did when he created human beings, that it's this holy sacrament. And so if I married a woman, then God would heal me and make me attracted to her.
So how do you go about finding a woman? Obviously someone within the church, would they say? Would that be the ideal situation?
Yeah, well, the suggestion from the person running this prayer ministry session was that I would probably have a best friend or someone who did tick all the boxes that a marriage partner should tick. And so that's what I did. I went back and my best friend and I had conversations. We ended up dating for a very short time. I was 18. And then within a year we were engaged, and within another 6 months we were married.
So was this kind of a plan that you both knew that it wasn't a legit romance, or did you learn that, oh, wait a minute, I can give this a go and I can have feelings and this can work out?
No, so she was very unaware. Very sadly, she was a victim that was brought into this mess. As an 18-year-old who for so many years was desperate to get rid of this homosexuality because I believed the narrative, I was willing to do anything, and so desperate and so naive and I guess innocent and believing the Christian leaders who were around me, I was willing to give anything a go. And if I thought, hey, this could mean that God would heal me and I'll be attracted to women, I'll be attracted to my wife, then I'll do it. But in our wedding day, I sort of imagined that it would be like a Disney moment, that whenever I said I do, some magical feeling would happen or some miracle would happen, but it just didn't happen that way. And we finished the wedding ceremony and still was not attracted to my wife. The first night of our honeymoon was very awkward, all was a result of these conversion practices.
Was the church happy that you got married? Were they thinking, okay, we've healed you and you're going to live happily ever after?
Yeah, and look, there was only a very select number of people who knew about my homosexuality, or in their eyes, what they would call my struggle with homosexual attraction. Those people would definitely have thought, oh, look at this success story. Aaron now got married. He's on a path to, living a holy life.
And what about your parents, especially your mother? Was she happy that you were married and you are now healed?
I don't think it was ever something that we ever really addressed once I was with my wife, or even with her when she was my girlfriend. It was just the taboo topic that never got mentioned in our household. So the fact that I was married was very, very pleasing to my parents, but there was never a discussion had that, oh, we're glad that you're now healed.
So now you're married. How did life play out with you knowing that you weren't attracted to women, yet you were married, you were still in the church? That must have been a pretty brutal time for you during that period.
Yeah, it was. Look, as Christians believe that there are often things like a thorn in your side. So there's a character in the Bible named Paul who has this thorn in his side that no matter how many times he asked God to remove it, it never got removed. And Jesus talks about how you have to carry your cross daily, just like he carried his own cross to the death. And so I just believed that this was my struggle in life that I had to learn to live with, so that a sign to others, or even a sign to God, that I was a holy and obedient, faithful Christian. As part of that, I got very involved in the church, did an internship, did university, our theology at university, and became a pastor within the Pentecostal church. And in 2015, my wife and I started our own church in Melbourne, which grew pretty quickly, quite successful. And I wrote a book, traveled the world speaking at conferences and different churches. And so just kept myself busy with running and leading the church and ignored that whole aspect of my life.
Wow. When did the wheels start falling off?
Yeah, the wheels didn't start falling off until 2017. Late 2017, had a lesbian couple start attending our church, and it was something that I had always ignored. It was the one area of theology I had never really wanted to touch, was the issue of sexuality. And so just had always ignored that aspect of the Bible and wanted to keep it at bay in my own life. So not touch it because it's too painful, just ignore it, keep busy, and it won't cause any trouble. And then one Sunday, this lesbian couple walks through our doors, and that set a course for having to look at what did the Bible actually say about sexuality, because for us to have a lesbian couple attending the church was one thing, but if they wanted to get involved and start participating, then we would have to either ask them not to be involved because of their sexuality, or allow them to, but have an answer to Christians wider than just our church as to why we were letting that happen. And so I had to start studying, what did the Bible actually say about sexuality? And in that 2-year process, found very quickly that there's only 6 passages, which we would refer to as the clodder passages in the Bible, where the word homosexuality is used, and all 6 of them are taken out of context greatly. In fact, the word homosexual wasn't even added into the Bible until 1946. And so when I realized that, late 2019, sort of my world started to cave in around me. I felt really manipulated, and my mind was just all over the place. Started feeling really depressed, anxious, and knew that I either had to come out publicly to my wife, to my family, to my church, and that would mean a whole lot of things. Probably lose my role, lose my family, and lose my community. but also, or I could just choose to keep going on and pretend I'd not seen that, which I think would just never have worked because it felt like there was a whirlwind going on inside me.
Well, as they say, when you're hiding something or putting something off all the time, it has a great way of coming back at you no matter what you try to do. So by you accepting and moving forward and being your true, honest self, you let all that tension and anxiety go to move forward and become who you really are, which is a pretty amazing thing when you get to that point in life.
Yeah, and it is now something like after having come out in early 2020, almost 4 years on, I'm the happiest I've ever been, and it's been something that's really freed me a whole lot. Didn't even realize the weight of what I was carrying for so many years before that.
And so your ex-wife now, was she happy for you to live your authentic life? Was she okay with it?
Yeah, look, I had prepared myself for a number of things to happen when I came out. One of them was that my wife would hate me. I was ready for her to be really upset and angry that she'd been a victim that was brought in to this charade. But she was incredible. The day I sat down and told her, she was the first person I told. And she was such a strong and encouraging person in my world at that time, while she was so sad and so hurt and broken by what she had just found out. She was such a strong support to me the whole way through. And I remember in the conversation, she said, it makes sense. There's a whole lot that has been missing in our relationship, intimacy-wise, that she wondered what was wrong. And she's just glad that it's not her that is the problem or not something else that's the problem, that it's actually this. She wanted me to be happy.
It's interesting you say that about how she thought, well, now I know it's not me. I'm not the problem within the relationship. Not that you were either, but I suppose it was probably a full circle moment for her too to go, well, this kind of does make sense now as well.
Yeah, she said it brought a lot of clarity. And she was very hurt and grieved the breakdown of a marriage and our relationship and what she thought it was. But at the same time was such a support to me through some of my darkest moments that unfolded after that.
So I would imagine once you decided to leap, things would have got pretty rough because, again, you're still within a church community. You're still a pastor. You're still got, obviously, a lot of friends that are from the church as well. So who hung around and stuck up with you and who just disappeared or started becoming your enemies?
Yeah, it was really a time that showed you who your true friends were. Sadly, I was fired. My wife and I went and told the leaders of our denomination, the Australian Christian churches, the next day after I'd spoken to my wife. And they sort of took things over with the church leadership, and I was removed from the role of pastor in our church and asked not to make contact with anyone in the church.
Wow.
And that they would take over the leadership, and they would make sure that people understood from their side of things what the narrative was. And yeah, so very quickly, the people who were in my world, other pastors and leaders who I would speak with weekly and sometimes daily, it was cricket. Phone wasn't ringing. There were no text messages coming through like there used to be. And then people from within our own church, they sort of were grieving, feeling lied to, feeling like I was making this decision because I wanted to act on these impulses or these temptations, and I'd just given up and I was weak, rather than really truly understanding that I'd spent so much time studying it and that I'd come to a place where I'd made an educated decision to come out. It wasn't an emotional or a giving in to temptation like they thought, but there was no real opportunity for me to communicate with them. So yeah, again, there was crickets from the church community that I'd pastored for 5 years. And so I had my wife by my side, some really close friends that I'd met in the musical theatre world by my side, and a very, very small number, maybe I could count on two hands from the church that had stayed by my side as we'd grown up together. And they sort of saw beyond, even if they didn't agree with me, they sort of saw beyond it and wanted to maintain some sort of relationship. But everyone else, silence. And even my own parents, sadly, my mum was disappointed greatly and didn't want to condone my lifestyle and felt somewhat sick that I'd done what I'd done, and so had created a separation between herself and myself, which lasted a couple of years. No real contact at all, and no going to family events or anything like that because of that separation.
So your life as you knew it was literally changed forever at this point. So where do you go, knowing that you've lost everything that you've been working towards and building up. You've got a few people left. You've got your ex-wife that's still by your side, which is pretty amazing in itself. But what do you do?
Good question. The other thing that happened was COVID lockdown hit a few weeks later. So there wasn't a lot I could do. Except for I moved into a house with a friend of mine from the music theatre scene. She was fantastic and a really great support. And I had to start looking for work and so really started applying for jobs. Given the leadership experience and the things that I'd done, I thought, there should be some really easy work that I could step into. There should be an easy way to get a role. But very quickly I learned that church ministry doesn't really translate to corporate, and they don't really understand it. So it was very hard to find work. But I was able to enter an entry-level position in a startup tech company in sales, where the director literally told me that he was taking a chance on me, and that thankfully, a few years later, the chance paid off.
So there was no opportunity with you going back into some kind of church to be a pastor? That wasn't even an option? Not
within the denomination that I was a pastor. Within the Australian Christian churches, the Pentecostal movement in Australia, that was not going to be an option. It's very clear in their church constitution and statement of faith that homosexuality is something that would deem you as not eligible for any form of leadership or involvement in church.
Now, I'm not a religious person, so I'm not sure of churches and groups out there. To your knowledge, is there any church out there that is welcoming for the LGBTIQ plus community, have changed the model to be all-inclusive?
Yeah, look, there are some select groups and denominations that are more welcoming. There's the Uniting Church, and then there's some independent churches. I had been brought up in Baptist and Pentecostal churches, which they are not open, welcoming, or affirming at all. They would say that they are welcoming because you can go and attend one of their services, but they're not affirming. So you could never get involved in the community. Really, a lot of you being able to be active in your faith as a Christian is about being involved and serving each other and being active participant in the church community. And so when that's off the cards for you, it doesn't make you feel great as a human being. And so, the Baptist world, the Pentecostal world are not affirming. There is a church here in Melbourne called Bayside Church, Pastor Rob Buckingham, who only in late 2020, early 2021 changed their church constitution. They are a Pentecostal independent church, and they changed their church constitution to allow LGBTQ plus members to be actively involved and even be on staff and pastoral staff. So they saw the 6 Clobber passages and had done some research and study and saw that, hey, the Bible doesn't say what we've been saying it said for such a long time. It's time to make a change because we are hurting a whole population within our society by being unwelcoming and unaffirming.
Because I find that really interesting with religion as a whole. It's about, not preaching hate, preaching love. But then when you look at the fundamentals of it, by saying you're not allowed to be a part of our church, it's just doing what they're saying that they're all about. Looking back at it now, you've been a part of that community. You'd know both sides of it. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts I have around it. Number one, since coming out and having spent time really thinking and studying different religions, not just Christianity, but all sorts of religion and spirituality since having come out, I've come to a place where I really find organized religion is something that causes more harm than it does good in society. I sort of refrain from wanting to be a part of any form of organized religion, be it church or any faith group, because there's always someone who's not welcome, even if they're an affirming church for the LGBT community, like some of the Uniting churches and even the Catholic Church now saying that they're going to approve marriage within same-sex people, that there's still other people groups that are not welcome. And so for me, there's that contrast of what they're preaching, like you said, of this message of love, but there's still people who are not loved enough to be able to be in the circle. And so that would be my first thought. The second thought is I don't really blame the everyday churchgoers, everyday attendees of the church who in some way are victims to all of this because they've been brought up in it. They've been almost brainwashed to believe the things they believe and told that, hey, loving our world and loving these people who are chasing sin and giving into this temptation is to show them that, hey, you cannot be part of this inner circle. You won't get to go to heaven if you're going to do that. And so a way to get the world around you to change is to show them what you're missing out on. And hopefully they desire it enough to want to buy into it and let go of the sin in their lives. And so these people believe that that's really genuinely love. The people who I blame and who I get annoyed at is the higher levels of leadership that are pushing this narrative down to people who aren't trained to really understand what these ancient texts are really trying to say. I mean, they were written to specific audiences with a specific intent in mind, not to 21st century Australians. And so, your everyday churchgoer like my mum, I don't blame her for believing that her sort of ending sort of relationship with me for a while was the right thing to do, because it's what these leaders who have built their own narrative and pushed this narrative have taught her to believe.
And it's interesting you were saying about how you found out that clause in the Bible about homosexuality was only put in there in, what did you say, 1947?
1946, yeah.
So did you ever delve into that and find out how that came to be?
Yeah, so there's actually just been a documentary that's been released in the last few months called 1946, the mistranslation that changed the world, I think it's called. And it talks about this group of translators who were responsible for translating the Revised Standard Version of the Bible in 1946. And they changed, the word was abuser of man or pedophile in many translations. And it's this hybrid word in the original language that could be man and bed. And so they've taken that and put the word homosexual there. All of their archives are lodged in Yale University. And in 1959, a young theological student wrote a letter to that translation team saying, hey, I think you've made a mistake here. I don't think that term means homosexuality, and I don't think it should have been that word should have been put in there. In fact, this is dangerous. If you put this in here, this is going to be used as a sacred weapon against homosexuals in the future by the church. And there's a letter responding to him from those translators who were on the original panel in 1946 that say, you're right. And they end up changing the RSV version back and removing the word homosexual. But badly in that time between when they translated it and when that letter was written, some other translations and versions like the NIV and the ESV had followed and copied the RSV had done and weren't part of that dialogue with the letters to know that it was being changed back in the RSV. So a lot of the translations that modern evangelical churches use today are still using that flawed and incorrect translation to teach their people that homosexuality is wrong.
That's fascinating because that pretty well says it all, doesn't it? We've got a typo here, we fixed it, okay, we didn't get everyone in time, but hey, this is how it should have been translated. But meanwhile, 60, 70 years on, these other churches are just going, oh no, that was right, let's just run with that, and causing all this harm and anxiety and torture to 10% of the world's population.
That's it.
And it's that saying where God loves all his children, and if he loves all his children, therefore he would love any of his children. He's created every one of them. He's created everything on this planet. Therefore, nothing is a mistake.
That's it. And that's how it should be read. In fact, I think that's what Jesus' whole message was when he was on earth, and what you read in the pages of the Bible when in those four Gospels that talk about Jesus' life. He always had a problem with the religious leaders of their time. He would call them hypocrites, and he would tell them that they'd created rules upon rules, and they'd made it harder for people to actually find what true spirituality was. And he said, all those rules that you've made it about, they don't matter. The only rules that matter is that you love God and love each other. He pretty much did away with all the other commandments and the things that religious leaders still today act like hypocrites in trying to uphold and force upon their communities.
Pretty well says it all. Less is more, really. All the other stuff didn't matter. And if he was saying that, well, there's obviously something to it. Do you think the churches will ever get it? Will they ever learn? Do you think they'll ever wake up and go, sorry, we were wrong?
I really hope so. I think there's a lot of people like me who are being brought up in Christian families who are gay. There's young gay men out there that believe that who they are is wrong, and the suicide rate of young people gay who are LGBT and in religious circles is just astronomical. And so I really hope, for the sake of people like me, I'm lucky enough to have made it through, but for every one of me, there's another 5 who don't. And that's what's scary and sad. And so my hope is that I can now take the pain and my past trauma and use it as a light, shine a light on some of the problems within the church community, but also give hope to young gay Christians out there who think that there's no hope after coming out, that they would lose everything. Hopefully my story is one that can show them, hey, you're not going to lose it all. Actually, starting again leads you to be the happiest you've ever been.
Exactly. And that's what this podcast is all about. If it gets to a handful of people and makes them realize there is more to life, that makes it all worth it. On saying that, you are an advocate for conversion therapy. You campaign against it. Can you tell us a bit about that passion of yours to make sure that this doesn't keep happening anywhere in the world?
Yeah, well, I didn't go through conversion therapy itself, but I did go through many conversion practices. And sadly, in New South Wales right now, conversion practices are still legal. The government were meant to put through a legislation to ban conversion practices in their entirety, not just therapy, but altar calls where they call people forward to renounce sin and praying for someone to be set free of their sexuality. All of that is a conversion practice because it's practicing something that's trying to convert someone from one way to another when it comes to their identity and who they are. Yeah, unfortunately, it's still legal in New South Wales. The government were meant to make the change, but the Christian community became very loud and felt like it was going to be removing their freedom to speech and some of their rights. And so the government have reneged on making the change now, and it's now being pushed out to March to be discussed. They're going to liaise with the church community, which is just mind-boggling in itself, that the government would liaise with the perpetrators of abuse as to what the solution should be.
Exactly. That's crazy. Well, even to think that is still happening in 2024 is mind-boggling.
Yeah, look, I only saw a video the other day of something that happened in a church in Sydney where they had a speaker from America. That speaker had invited people to come forward who were struggling with different things to be prayed for. And this young man walks up to the stage, probably early 20s. She asked him what is his sin, and he said that his sin was homosexuality, and she puts her hands on his shoulders and prays that he would be set free of the demon of homosexuality, and he falls to the floor crying. And the sad thing for that young man is that he will have walked out of that building the same and wishing that he was different and believing that he was not good enough for God to heal. And like many young people, the risk of him now being suicidal and him going through really deep depression because of this self-worth that has been eradicated because of the church and their teachings is just, it's really sad.
And it's probably no coincidence that a lot of church groups put in a lot of money into government for elections and what have you. So therefore, unrightly so, they have a little bit more push when laws are coming into place that they don't think that is appropriate, which is totally wrong in its own right.
Yeah, it is. And look, while we're probably not deemed as Christian a society as the states necessarily, I would say that if you look at a lot of our politicians, they are religious in some way or another, and most of them are involved with Christian religion. That is obviously going to lead to biases there in the way that our policies and our legislation get formed.
It's scary to think they have that much reach.
Yeah. Our last Prime Minister was a Pentecostal Christian and definitely allowed that bias to affect the way he led.
That pretty well sums it up, doesn't it? And hence why he's not in today. But that's a whole nother podcast, I'm sure.
That's right.
So you bring out a book called Mindfulness. Tell us a bit about the book.
Yeah, look, the book was a small dive into dealing with anxiety in the everyday. It was a really practical book that I wrote based around a story in the Bible of a king whose kingdom was being threatened by a much larger army than his kingdom, and what he did in order to overcome the anxiety that he was facing as a result of all of that pressure. And we had a lot of young people within our church that felt like the common theme in their lives was anxiety, and I had battled a lot of that in my life with having to keep this secret and this weight. And so yeah, those four things I think are still very practical and still very relatable. I probably, if I was ever to rewrite the book, I'd probably take the Bible story out of it and maybe use more of my own learnings through my journey in life instead. But yeah, I'd say that the four key practical steps are still really relevant, just not the rest of the story.
And you're a great example of showing that it does get better and you can work through anything and have a great, fantastic life. Just with you having conversation today, that's just great to hear someone's story who's come through the other side, and people who are listening out there who are in the same position that you were not that long ago, knowing that there is hope. And that's what we're all about, the hope of it does get better.
Yeah, that's it. And I think just holding on to that is such a key, holding on to that knowledge that there's nothing so bad that's worth ending it all, and that you can find hope. You just got to find people that have that similar story to look to for that hope. And sadly, when I was going through it, there wasn't many stories like mine. It was very much the opposite. There were stories of successful conversion and look at this once gay man who's now straight. And so that's what you thought was success. That's the hope that the Christian world gave you, that there's hope to be healed and saved of your sexuality. I'm hoping to offer a different narrative to those young gay Christians who are questioning whether they have any worth at all.
And do you know, within your church groups, was there anyone else who got married and went through a similar process to you that you know of?
Yeah, so my ex-wife went to see a psychologist who, after the breakdown of our marriage, and that psychologist shared with her that she has seen, sadly, multiple women whose husbands received the same advice that I did. Obviously, she couldn't share the details of those people, but where these people who had been told, if you marry a woman, you'll be healed, you'll be set free of your homosexuality. And so they did that, but obviously it didn't work for them and they ended up coming out and their marriages broke down. Sadly, those stories are never pushed forward. So you don't know about them because they're not the success stories that the church would want to focus on. And so you don't know about these things. Often it's masked as that person was unfaithful or that person had an affair. And so you don't know the details to give you that hope.
Wow, that's interesting. So do you ever think that homosexuality and religion can work together?
Absolutely. Well, the Bible does not say what Christians say it says. And I think that's really the key. If they were to actually do their due diligence and look into what the Bible really says, if they're going to believe that is God's word and which the church does, then there is a way for them to move forward where the LGBTQ community can be welcomed, affirmed, and actively involved in churches. Whether that's my desire, having come through the other end and believing that organized religion probably does more harm than good, even if that was to be fixed, this one problem, I think there's going to be more harm caused by organized religion altogether.
And if you go back and tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
I think I would tell my younger self to be true to who you are and to not be scared of the outcome and not avoid delving deeper into what truth is for you.
Couldn't agree more myself. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on LGBTI Conversations today. Your story is very inspiring and I'm sure that people out there are going to hear it, relate to it, and you're going to help a lot of people by just talking today. So thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me on.
If you love listening to LGBTI Conversations, make sure to follow. This will help other people find us much easier. And also, make sure that you never miss out on an episode. Thanks for listening to LGBTI Conversations with me, Anthony Doik.